you have three incumbents. Most people who are on the Court of Criminal Appeals, their parents don't know they're on the Court of Criminal Appeals.
Yeah.
This is a race that has been ignored by voters, a position ignored by voters for a long time. Back in late 2021, you had the Court of Criminal Appeals strip the Office of the Attorney General of the power to prosecute election fraud, seen as just a completely boneheaded ruling by the Court of Criminal Appeals. All it did was enable the Soros DAs. All it did was enable the big city district attorneys, the big county attorneys, to just protect their friends. You didn't have kind of the oversight, looking out over the machine. And so Attorney General Ken Paxton took umbrage at that ruling initially. Couldn't do anything about it in 2022 because of the way the court very oddly timed their result, timed the release of the ruling. But now you've got these three justices, Sharon Keller, Hervey and Slaughter.
Barbara Hervey and Michelle Slaughter.
Yeah, Michelle Slaughter, who are on the ballot. All three voted with the majority to strip the AG of that authority. Let's talk about how these races are turning out for them now.
Yeah, so right now, I mean, at least in two of those spots, specifically we have Gina Parker challenging Barbara Hervey and David Schenck challenging Sharon Keller. Both of those look pretty certain that those challengers are going to win. In that third race, you have Lee Finley, who's got a little bit of a tighter margin against Michelle Slaughter. We'll see how that goes out. I mean, this is certainly one of those races. It's a statewide race, so every county matters. But the big headline here, right, is specifically exactly what you talked about, which is this case from, now 3 years ago, where the Court of Criminal Appeals came in and said the Attorney General doesn't have the authority to prosecute election fraud, had no authority to do that. And it looks like a lot of voters are saying, and Attorney General Ken Paxton had made this case during the campaign, that that's absurd. That of course the Attorney General should have that power. That was the centerpiece of this race. And you can see pretty clearly that that message seems to have permeated.
Yeah, I think it's very striking. Again, you look back at December 2021. You could not have found many people who could name a single member of the Court of Criminal Appeals, let alone many people who even knew it existed, right? That's not a slam on Texas voters. That's kind of a slam on, a slam on all of us and the way the judiciary is constructed. But I think that what that ruling has done is galvanize a lot of folks. So now you do have conversations, email this morning from one of our readers who told me that the only race she was paying attention to were these CCA races.
Yeah.
Didn't care about the Speaker of
Just
the House.
the
Dave
first
Fee,
time
talk about that.
you ever heard that.
Literally in 30 years of covering Texas politics, wow, I feel old when I say that, 30 years of covering Texas politics, no one has ever said that to me.
Yeah.
And yet, but I think a lot of folks see the stakes as being so high. When you think of let's jump from the kind of the top of the ticket to a good way down it, Harris County, where George Soros is spending in excess of $2 million to get elected a new district attorney to replace the district attorney that he spent somewhere around $1 million to get installed 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And George Soros, his district attorney, controls Harris County. And at least controls all the prosecutions in Harris County, which means that a George Soros-funded election fraudster is not going to be prosecuted by a George Soros district attorney. And that's precisely what the Texas legislature was trying to make sure you didn't have the place where if Harris County is subject to election fraud, you end up with the entire state being thrown into turmoil, possibly even the presidential contest. If election fraud takes place in Harris County, you can literally affect national elections. And it's just mind-boggling, I think, for a lot of folks that the Attorney General of Texas can't deal with those with those kind of cases.
Well, and maybe this is a good segue too as we look at some of these other races that we've been following tonight. But it's important to note that on one hand, responsibility for that decision obviously came down to the justices who made that decision, 3 of them who were up for re-election tonight. But there was also responsibility on the part of the Texas legislature. They had an entire legislative session where there was legislation filed to change that, to restore the authority that the Attorney General could go after election fraud cases. And they didn't do it. And the Texas House, specifically of Attorney General Paxton, saying that his conversations with Speaker Dade Phelan and his team, they said essentially it wasn't a priority. We, of course, saw what ended up being priorities when they did go through the session, were obviously much different. But, you know, that's the sort of thing I think you see a lot of voters being sort of tired of that, is that here's an issue where, you know, the Attorney General has elevated this issue, and yet the legislature seems completely unresponsive to the will of the voters. That's something that I think is a message that's being defeated tonight when you look at a lot of these races.
All right, so just to let y'all know what's happening here, we're going to spend an indeterminate amount of time this evening broadcasting, chatting about these different races. In a few minutes, we're going to be joined by a political consultant, Luke Macias, political commentator, I should say. Used to be a consultant, now he's a commentator. Luke Macias. Get old, you forget people's titles. Luke Macias will join us. He, of course, is the host of the Luke Macias Show, which you can find here on Texas Scorecard. So he is going to be joining us here in a few minutes. We're going to be talking about some of these races over the course of the evening so that we can update numbers. We've got the entire Scorecard team outside the 1836 studios furiously checking numbers from around the various counties. I know a lot of y'all, I'm getting a lot of texts and messaging here right now from folks saying, hey, where can I keep up with these races? Well, you got to do what we're doing and go check each of the individual counties. If you're relying on the Secretary of State's website, you're going to be there a while. You're going to be there a while before you get the results. You know, bless their hearts. That's just not what they're really designed to do. Yeah. So we're going to try to keep you updated throughout the night. And when we do so, we will go to commercials and little short breaks to fill in. And we'll be doing that here in just a couple minutes, so we can let Luke come into the studio and get situated with us. But before we do, there were a number of open seats, Brandon. Open seats in the Texas House where you saw some interesting movement happening. Two of them, I think, kind of I want to focus on because they seem to kind of encapsulate this fight going on between the grassroots and the crony establishment in Austin. House District 53, that is kind of the western edge of the Hill Country, used to be held by Andrew Murr, a sprawling district, I mean, it's kind of trite to say, but it's a state House district larger than several northeastern states.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Massive.
Having driven recently over the last couple of months over a lot of it, it's seemingly like never ending. You see signs for these candidates,
right?
And you're like, I saw one 4 hours ago.
Okay, so Andrew Murr, he was the lead prosecutor against Ken Paxton in the impeachment trial. He was dead set. He was going to be reelected. He was going to keep fighting the fight. And Wes Verdell, a gun rights activist, how most folks know him, Wes Verdell announced for the seat, was running. Texans for Lawsuit Reform paid for some polling for Andrew Murr, and somehow, after that polling was conducted, Andrew Murr suddenly decided he wanted to spend more time with his livestock. I think was the quote. He wanted to spend more time with the cows and the family, but also the cows, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. But anyway, I don't have cows. I've got a dog who's asleep over in my office right now. But he wanted to spend more time there, and he dropped out of the race. Now, this open seat between Wes Verdell and a fellow named Hatch, who was kind of handpicked by Murr. So tell us kind of how the race stands right now.
This was one of those races, too, to your point, where you see this happen. Wes Verdell is somebody who had challenged, by the way, Andrew Murr 2 years ago in the primary. Come up short then, but he was the challenger then. He had announced he was running again. You get this polling back from Murr. Shortly after that polling comes out, one thing leads to another. He decides he's not going to run again. And then what happens the next day? Literally, like one day, I think it was, after Andrew Murr announced he wasn't running for re-election, all of a sudden you get this campaign, splashy campaign, put together, press release, logo, all that, from Hatch Smith, somebody who had not been talking about wanting to run for office, not even talking about this race, and all of a sudden he comes in, he's got the support.
Never voted in a primary.
Yeah, and all of a sudden he's got the support of the establishment.
Right.
This is the kind of thing, and I think this is going to be a theme as we look at a lot of these races. This is the kind of thing the establishment forces have been successful with, and we've seen them be successful with in the past. It's the kind of thing that voters have, I think, woken up to and realized, wait, something's not up here, right? We know Wes, he's been campaigning. We don't know this Hatch Smith guy. Right now, as we're seeing it, and Wes Verdell has gained some endorsements. He even has had President Donald Trump's endorsement. Right now it looks like Wes Verdell is leading that race.
Okay, so that's a race where is a two-man race, no one else in the race.
Yeah.
House District 87, that's up in the high plains of Texas, the so-called Panhandle, Amarillo. That's where you had For Price, another he was actually a pal, like childhood friend of Joe Strauss, the previous disgraced former Speaker of the Texas House, and he is. So he decided not to seek re-election. That's a four-person race. Really, not to be disrespectful to the other two candidates, but really came down to two candidates. Tell us about the two of them. And it looks like one of them, the four-way race, is kind of walking away with it.
Yeah, well, in that and remind me of the district. I don't have who the candidates in that one.
That's Fairley.
That's the Caroline Fairley. Yes.
Caroline Fairley.
Someone who came in, by the way, when she announced, had the support of Senator Ted Cruz. We saw other groups come in and join us. So she really won. I mean, she won the endorsement game, right? And it looks like that is catching up. I mean, she is leading. Looks like she will probably win this. I think last I looked at the numbers, without a runoff, despite the fact that it is a four-way race. So certainly was her race to lose. And she comes in as somebody who is really, really different to For Price. For Price is somebody who, as we've talked about, has been an opponent to, for example, school choice. That is something that Caroline Fairley has been supportive of. And so already you see a difference there. And so it looks like you're going to get a lot more conservative representation in that district.
Okay, so we're going to right now take a quick break. We're going to start going through these races. I think based on our interest here, folks are interested in hearing about these races where you've got challengers going after incumbents. And we're going to be joined.
It's a big list.
It's a big list. And we're going to be joined by Luke Macias, who is the host of the Luke Macias Show. He is a political commentator, and sometimes he sings silly songs. But we will cover all that in just a moment. We will be back right after this.
Texas.
I don't know what the greens and the reds mean. Could you explain the
Scorecard? Every day at 5 p.m., join me, Brandon Waltens, as we recap the biggest stories of the day and talk about why they matter to you. From the state capitol to town hall, there's no shortage of events happening. Keep up with it all. Watch and subscribe to daily headlines from Texas Scorecard.
Do you want to see the world around you change? Are you looking for an internship that will help Texans lead the way in our country?
Texas Scorecard provides real news for real Texans and is one of the fastest growing news outlets in the state. Right now, Scorecard is looking for young people interested in journalism and media.
We call it the fellowship. Not exactly that kind of fellowship, but you will find yourself around like-minded world changers dedicated to telling stories that matter to Texans.
We're looking for young people ages 18 to 25 to join our paid fellowship. All fellows will receive a monthly stipend of $2,000 to cover their expenses.
Fellows will have the opportunity to specialize in one of three tracks: writing, research, and administration.
Go to texasscorecard.com/fellowship to apply today.
If you're not watching the Luke Macias Show, then you are not as engaged as everybody else is in Texas who's trying to make a difference, knowing exactly what's going on so that they can take action on the things that really matter. Guys, watch us on the Roku app for Texas Scorecard. Watch us on YouTube. Listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Get engaged, get more informed, so together we can actually make a bigger difference on things that matter for the future of Texas. God bless you.
Latinos aren't all the same. The media in Hollywood might try to paint us with broad brushstrokes, but that's because most of them aren't Latinos. As a community, we deeply care about our faith, our families, and the cultural erosion we see happening across our state and nation. Each day on the Salcedo Storm podcast, I talk about the issues that matter to Latinos and all Americans. No fluff, no pulling punches, and no eschewing the truth for the sake of feelings. Real talk about the real issues Latinos and Americans care about. The Salcedo Storm podcast. I hope you'll join me weekdays wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, hey, welcome back. Thanks for us. Take that quick break while we got Luke Macias situated here. Luke, thanks for taking a few minutes to sit down with us here this evening. To be clear, Luke did not break too many laws joining us this evening, but you did you did do your duties, I assume, as a precinct chair in Bexar County before joining us here in the super secret studios, right?
I conducted my precinct election in Bexar County and then got here as quick as I could.
Yeah. So what the people want, people want us to go through some of these races. So I think let's go through as many as we can here. If we want to talk about some of them, we can do that afterward. But I think it's important to run through some of these, at least as we're seeing them right now. These numbers could change in a lot of them. I know you have a list. I think,
so
right
I'll
here.
kick off. You guys start hitting us. Okay, House District 1. That's Van Dever, Holes, Spencer. Where do we see there?
I currently think that it's probably headed to a runoff. I'm not sure whether Spencer or Van Dever are going to be in first. They're pretty tight, but I do think it's a likely a runoff between Spencer and Van Dever. Spencer was backed by Governor Abbott, and several other statewide like Sid Miller, and Gary Van Dever, of course, is one of those that was bad on school choice.
Okay, House District 2. This is where we just had a special election that Jill Dutton won, so she is technically the incumbent, but she's never served a day of her life in the legislature. Will she be serving a day of her life in the legislature?
Well, she was sworn in, I think, a couple weeks ago, so she gets to call herself the Honorable. But it looks like after tonight's results, she will not likely be the Republican nominee, which means that she won't be on the ballot in November, which means she's not going to be in the legislature next session by all looking at this. So this was a thing where you had Brent Money come out. And the big difference here, keep in mind, was that in that low turnout special election runoff race a few weeks ago, or about a month ago or so, that is a race that is open to Democrats. Democrats can go vote in it. And so a lot of the observers at that time were saying, well, just wait until the Republican primary because Brent Money's going to have a lot more support among Republicans. Turns out that looks like that was the case.
Okay, House District 4, Keith Bell, the incumbent there, being challenged by Feuerstein.
Yes, sir.
Most known for being upset about Starbucks coffee cups. How's that race going?
Keith Bell is going to likely get reelected. This is one of those where, the conservative challenger didn't take off as well. I think most people had this race trending Bell originally, so no surprise that he's there.
Yeah. Steve Toth, one of the House District 15, that's just outside of Houston, Montgomery County. There was some talk that he might be in trouble. The only, should be noted, the only of the conservative legislators who was challenged, incumbents who was being challenged kind of from the left by the Cornyn establishment. So Toth versus Hubert.
Yeah, Skeeter Hubert. This is notable because he was, to your point, one of the only conservatives that had an actual challenger where he was having to fight that off. But it was a challenger that wasn't just a random name on the ballot. This is somebody who had received a lot of money, especially in the last few weeks, from ART, Associated Republicans of Texas. I was talking to some people in that district who their mailboxes were just flooded with anti-Steve Toth mail in the last couple weeks. And despite that heavy push, looks like Steve Toth is going to sail through to victory.
That's right.
Okay.
ART dropped $300,000.
Yeah, $300,000
in the last 2 to 3 weeks.
It was,
they were literally, dumping $125,000 a week.
Okay. House District 18, this is Ernest Bales. This is Liberty County. This is the home of Colony Ridge, the illegal alien housing mecca. It was a three-way primary. Bales incumbent with Holt and Missick as the two challengers there. The word I'm getting is that Bales is currently losing to Holt and looks like probably heading to a runoff.
It looks like it, but I will say that Holt, a couple other counties came out. I think we have right now have Holt just over 50. So she's probably, I would say I would plan a runoff there right now, but I think Holt does have a path to getting over 50% of the vote there. And so either way, an important statistic for our viewers to know is that 83% of the time that an incumbent goes to a runoff over the last 30 years, they've lost that runoff.
Yeah.
And so understand that if you're an incumbent, if you're an Austin insider, you see an incumbent go to a runoff, odds are that guy's not coming back.
And particularly, when you have to kind of think of it from that idea of buyer's remorse, right? Where when folks have made the decision, when 52%, you may be the incumbent leading in the first round, but 52% of the voters have said, "I'm done with you." It's a pretty easy sell to move them to the other candidate.
Yeah.
100%.
Plus the enthusiasm gap that you generally see in a runoff, your smaller turnout. It's all the reasons that these are really hard for incumbents.
Okay, I want to go to House District 19. This is Ellen Troxclair being the incumbent being challenged by Mr. Biederman and Ms. Campos. Tell us about this race.
She's a little over 50 right now. The question's going to be whether she gets pulled into a runoff as Gillespie County comes in and other counties are going to be more favorable to Biederman come in. Ultimately, it's important to understand that Ellen Troxclair just in the last 3 weeks spent about $1 million.
Yeah.
That's just a massive amount of money.
We're not for a race we'll be talking about next. This might have been the most expensive state rep race in Texas history.
I mean, they're all
at least
so
coming
close.
They're all
I feel
coming
like
close,
the top 10 are all the most expensive races in Texas
probably
history.
There was a lot, but
we
you might not know in this. So I do want to make the note that in this race, it is particularly unique in that you have Gillespie County, Fredericksburg, that area, which is a part of this district. They are for the first time doing hand counting of the ballots tonight, and so that could, this is the first time they're doing that. We'll see how smoothly that goes and whether we'll have a result tonight.
Okay, the other quick note I want to make for folks, just so we have a lot of new people live in Texas. In other states, your primaries end up where kind of like a general election, where just whoever has the most votes, even if it's not a majority, that they get to win the election. In Texas, in the primaries, you have to get 50% plus one vote to be the party's nominee. So just because you see an incumbent with 49.99% doesn't necessarily mean they've lost. Now they are, as we noted earlier, they're on a path to losing, but they have not yet lost in the sense that they are now headed to runoff. Now, if you're an incumbent going to a runoff, and even if you think you're going to win that runoff, you still feel like a loser on primary election.
That's right.
Okay, now the race that everyone is most interested in is House District 21. That is Southeast Texas, that's Beaumont, that's Jasper, that's Orange County. Dade Phelan, Speaker of the Texas House, but he's also a state representative, being challenged to a race by Alicia Davis and David Covey. Mr. Covey, of course, has the endorsement of, well, I think everyone in elected office. Famously, only Rick Perry is, I think, the only notable person who has, kind of stuck his neck out.
Well, and he's been down there, right? He's been
waving signs and working it hard. Greg Abbott has stayed out of the race, again, also notably. So this race, because I'm getting these numbers hit to me right now, David Covey is leading that race with 46% of the vote, followed by Phelan at 44.5%, and the change going to a businesswoman, Alicia Davis. I mean, set aside anything else, Luke. I know we're trying to speed through these things, but I just have to stop on this and say,
this is an important one.
This is the Speaker of the Texas House. A Speaker of the Texas House being forced into a runoff. That just doesn't happen, does it?
And we haven't seen, so Covey again up, and also notable that in the event that the incumbent is actually second going into the runoff, I think there's one time in the last 30 years that incumbent has then gotten reelected. So that's an even worse situation, whether they're first or second. It is historic. Understand that, I mean, David Covey spent maybe $700,000 to Dade Phelan's like $4 to $5 million on his reelection campaign. These people have gotten every single thing in the book from Dade Phelan, And if he goes into a runoff, it is going to be blood in the water from everybody. I mean, all of his own Cardinals are going to be trying to, cut each other up to get that speakership.
Yeah, not to toot horns or anything.
No.
But if you go to Texas Scorecard on Saturday, a little analysis piece written by one of the three of us about how they feel done being Speaker. And the election results, a Speaker of the House, their number one job is to protect the members.
Yep.
And you can't protect the members if you're in second place going into a runoff.
I had a member of the legislature tell me yesterday, "Did you read Michael Sullivan's piece?" And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "I think that's pretty spot on." And so, I mean, you have people in Austin already having those conversations.
Yeah.
The reality is this: what we haven't seen in most of these districts yet is the election day trend. Now,
Right.
I am estimating, based on just kind of calculating turnout, that about 60% of the vote voted early. And so about 40% is going to come in on election day. The assumption right now is that Trump voters tend to be election day voters. Now, if that is, now Trump has done very well in early voting, but if that is the case, it might be that in situations like a David Covey or situations like a Helen Kerwin or some of these candidates that are right there on the edge, or a Janice Holt who got the Trump endorsement, where you can see Janice, if she's at 49, that all of a sudden election day votes start coming in and she's ticking up over 50.
That's interesting, because the traditional thought in election cycle past was always the establishment tended to benefit from election day, but that's an interesting, I think you're right. I think things may have shifted, and we'll find out soon enough if things have shifted with Trump.
Okay, so our CEO Nathan Ophe is screaming at me, saying we need to get through these. Folks are wanting more. We're wanting more. Okay, so
Can we go
give
to
you more.
statewide real quick?
No, we've already talked about statewide. You were off
you were
being a precinct chair.
gone.
Okay, House District 20. We'll come back to the precinct chair. We'll teach
State
you to
Board
be
of
late.
Education? Did y'all do that
No,
already?
not that. We'll come back to
Okay.
that. House District 26. This is J.C. Jatan, Morgan, and Wong challenging. In this race, you've got the incumbent, latest numbers, Mr. Morgan, 55% to Jatan, 39%. That is wild.
They're
yeah.
absolutely wild.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, I mean, this was with Matt Morgan, who's challenging
This is
Jatan.
Fort Bend County. This is just outside of Houston.
And Matt Morgan doing so with the support, I believe, of Congressman Troy Nehls in that district, somebody who is a popular figure there. And so, but, absolutely surprising, especially if he's able to win without a runoff. We'll see.
If he does. I mean, again, that's another one
Yeah.
where groups like Texans for Lawsuit Reform went in and dropped high 6 to low 7 figures to try to get Jatan over. They were buying Houston broadcast television, which is, $10,000
Expensive stuff,
for a sports ad. And it looks like Troy Nehls, who, again, Troy Nehls has always outperformed in Fort Bend County for those who kind of follow that area. So that would be a huge upset.
Okay, let's move now to House District 33. That's now up into the Metroplex. And the incumbent there is Justin Holland, being challenged by former Trump spokeswoman Katrina Pearson and businessman Dennis London. In the numbers I'm seeing that I'm being given right now, Holland is at 39.2%, Pearson at 38.8%. Of that
Yep.
vote.
Wow.
Dennis London is the other conservative challenger in that race. He has the rest of the vote share in that. It's important to understand that if you're a Dennis London voter who ran against Justin Holland 2 years ago, you are going to very likely be a Katrina Pearson voter in that runoff. And so Holland is somebody who has been targeted by a lot of these forces and clearly has shown that he's very vulnerable. He's one of 2 Republicans that voted to lower or to raise the age to purchase what the left would call an assault rifle.
Bad on education reform, bad on gun
Guns.
rights.
Gun rights.
Yeah, I mean, it's good in the line, and he's kind of obnoxious.
Has great suits.
I just want to note that we sometimes skate past this when you talk about the third place person. Dennis London, hard campaigner, really nice fellow who was out talking about Holland's record and problems that he was having kind of with the grassroots in that community long before anyone else does. And so Dennis London contributing in a very important way to Katrina Pearson's victory, or at least moving into a victory tonight. House District 55, this is kind of the north end of central Texas. Hugh Shine is the incumbent there. Being taken to the woodshed this evening by his challenger.
He voted not only wrong on school choice, he voted to give taxpayer money to hospitals that are socially transitioning kids, mental health care facilities and stuff. And so this guy is one of the 10 most liberal Republicans in the Texas House. If he loses without a runoff, that is going to be, again, a major upset to that faction that often sides with Democrats.
All right, let's move to House District 58. This is kind of west and south of Fort Worth. The incumbent there is Dwayne Burns. He has two challengers, including Helen Kerwin from Glen Rose. And it looks like that's going to be another runoff.
Looks like another runoff.
But with the challenger in first place.
Yes, and in this case, and I know Luke has said this, I think, many times on your show, Dwayne Burns, nice guy, not very good on the issues if you're a conservative, right? And so Helen Kerwin, who is somebody who has roots in that area, was a mayor in the district there. She gets into this race, frankly, not too short before the filing deadline. I mean, it was towards the end of that. Comes in, though, with the support of people like Governor Abbott, Ted Cruz, etc. And you just see how that pairing really does help propel a lot of these candidates, specifically when they're going up against members who Abbott has targeted because they have opposed his signature priority, which is school choice.
All right, let's go to House District 60. This is maybe beyond the Phelan race. This might be the most watched race in Texas, particularly among school choice advocates. That's Mike Alcott challenging Glenn Rogers, again, another obnoxious incumbent. Tell us about this race.
Well, I will admit my bias. Mike Alcott was at my wedding. Okay, so this guy is somebody who I consider a close friend, but the reality is that not only did Mike absolutely crush him in Parker County, but Palo Pinto County. And you have to understand that when Glenn Rogers originally won this race, he got 70% of the vote in Palo Pinto. 2 years ago, when he beat Mike by a couple hundred votes in a runoff, he got about 73% in Palo Pinto, and Mike actually beat him in early voting, 51-49.
Wow.
Greg Abbott went to Palo Pinto County, had a rally there, and said, guys, I made a mistake when I told y'all to vote for Glenn Rogers. It really does look like that's another one where the school choice and the Paxton Coalition and the grassroots as a whole, when they all team up together, they do move a lot of numbers.
And I want to talk about the specific numbers here just because it is pretty significant. Mike Alcott is at about 64% against the incumbent. And if you follow Glenn Rogers on Twitter, you have seen in real time, in 150 characters, someone who recognizes they're losing and having a breakdown with his all caps tweeting. Anyways, that's been an interesting race to watch. Okay, moving on now. House District 61, deep into the Metroplex. That's Frederick Frazier. He is the former cop, former city councilman, dishonorably discharged as a cop because he impersonated people in his last election. To say the guy's got problems would be a mild understatement.
Well, he's got another problem now, which
What's
is
that?
he's going into a runoff. He's going to be in second place.
Problems keep piling up on poor Frederick.
And voters might dishonorably discharge him from the legislature.
You've been waiting to say that for a while.
That was pretty good, right?
That one.
This was unique in the sense that Frederick Frazier was one of the members that Governor Abbott, when he endorsed every Republican incumbent who voted for school choice, he endorsed Frederick Frazier, and yet we saw that as the governor did events over the last several months in Collin County, he notably never held one for Frederick Frazier. And so that sort of said a lot. And you saw a lot of voters find out about, literally, I mean, we don't have time to go into it, but this guy, if you look at the stories we've done, and Aaron Anderson has done a great job reporting on, literally impersonates a code compliance officer. He's stealing his opponent's signs. I mean, just absolutely low stuff. And once voters saw this, I don't think you've seen a dip in popularity this fast for a freshman member. I mean, absolutely incredible. So he finds himself in a very, very tough position.
Looking like he'll be in a runoff with Carissa Richardson.
Yes.
And Carissa is the owner of a plumbing company. She's a longtime activist. She's hosted a ton of fundraisers and been very philanthropic to not only the community but conservative causes for a very long time. So she's very well known in that community, and that shows with her actually performing. Chuck Branch was the third person in that race, and honestly came right now. I mean, I think he will come in third, but he was a close third, meaning there was a path for a runoff where Frederick Fraser wasn't even in it. So it does look like he'll eke into the runoff with a massive amount of spending here at the end, but things do look, you'd rather be Carissa Richardson than Frederick Fraser right now.
Okay, let's move north to my old stomping grounds in Grayson County, where Reggie Smith, Bearcat class of 1988, is being challenged by Shelley Luther, who very famously challenged Greg Abbott's COVID lockdown mandates. That race is pretty close at the moment.
This is, a good example of when it's just a good reminder for grassroots candidates. Just because you lose one election doesn't mean you shouldn't step back into the arena, and Shelley Luther's done that. Right now she's winning. Now she's winning by 3 percentage points. It's about 950 votes, I believe, right now. That's a good, sizable lead that she has. So this is an upset. Now, important thing to talk about with Reggie Smith is he's the chair of the elections committee, and Reggie Smith not only voted to impeach Paxton, not only was wrong on school choice and charter schools, he also literally killed over a dozen election integrity bills. And Texans United for a Conservative Majority, when they launched television ads with Ken Paxton told the entire district time and time again, Reggie Smith is my number one opponent to passing election integrity laws in Texas. So with the Court of Criminal Appeals sweep that Paxton looks like he's currently getting, plus the elections chair in the House, who literally did all the dirty work. The assumption was that one of the Dade Phelan deals with the Democrats was that he told Democrats, I'll kill the election integrity stuff. Use Reggie Smith to be his hatchet man, to your point, Piece's point, cut him up. And now he right now is losing to a candidate he beat rather handily 2 years ago.
Okay, let's go to House District 64. That's just to the west. That is Lynn Stuckey is the incumbent. He's got 2 challengers, including Andy Hopper. Looks like this race is going into a runoff with, at the moment, with Hopper, I think, in the lead in that race. 45.1 to 44.7, narrow lead, but still in the lead with 90% of the vote in. You've got Andy Hopper it appears to be prepared to force Lynn Stuckey into a runoff.
Again, Lynn Stuckey underperformed Denton County, which he got in the high 60s last time, got 56% of the early vote this time. This is a Wise versus Denton County a little bit that it gets into. Wise and Denton are about 50-50 in that race, but I do think that looks like it's headed to runoff, and Andy has definitely performed very well.
Okay, House District 65 back deeper into the Metroplex. The incumbent there is Kronda Timich, being challenged by Mitch Little, and that race is
very
honestly
close.
A lot more narrow than
very
close. It would be with an
very close.
Female legislator.
They were separated by about 400 votes with early voting. Right now, you've got 1 of 51 or 52 precincts reporting Election Day, and so we'll see what happens on Election Day. This is actually going to be a real test too. I mean, President Trump didn't get involved in this race during the stage, but it will show you just what the electorate looks like on Election Day. Which way does that shift? Because you've still got a lot of votes left to be counted in that district.
House District 72, that is San Angelo, that you're now out into real West Texas. Drew Darby is the incumbent there. Pretty long-serving incumbent, being challenged by Stormy Bradley. Drew Darby looking like, my numbers just moved on me, looks like something like 80% of the I'm making things up now. About 35% of the district is reporting in there, but with Darby leading Bradley, but Bradley's areas are being slow to report in. So
with some of these rural districts, you do have to wait till all of the counties come in, because one thing that this election does remind us about is that politics is still local. So there are some of these races where Abbott and Trump and Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton were all on the same side that are doing very, very well. And there's other districts where they were all on the same side and it's really close. If not, the incumbent looks like he might eke it out, because candidates matter. These races are still local. So we will have to probably wait for a few more counties to come in. But it does look like Stan Lambert and Drew Darby, I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but Stan Lambert and Drew Darby are 2 out in West Texas. Abilene and San Angelo are both in the lead right now. Not massive leads, but definitely leading.
Yeah, so let's go down into Dallas County, where you've got Morgan Meyer, who is the incumbent there in House District 108, with about 72% of the count coming in, and Meyer is leading Barry Warnock, his challenger, 51 to 49.
Yeah, so another close one. This is a race, by the way, where Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, I think this was the first House race that he made an endorsement in this cycle. He then endorsed some other members and some other challengers in House races. But it's one where he had the support of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. It's one where President Trump as well came in, offered an endorsement. And so the fact that it is this close, this is an area that Morgan Meyer has now represented for several terms. So this is pretty big that he's being stuck down here to 51%, at least right now, as we're seeing the counting.
And the one thing I'll add to that is that Donald Trump endorsed Barry on the Monday of the second week of early voting. So the reality is that Barry definitely has been somebody who is peaking at the end. That's kind of how you want to sneak up on an incumbent like Morgan Meyer, who, just to remind anybody who doesn't know, he's the chairman of Ways and Means. Okay, if a sitting Republican chairman of Ways and Means loses or is only up by 2 points and Trump's endorsement came in late, I think we have to wait till Election Day voters come in to start making some projections.
Okay, speaking of incumbents who are having bad nights, I want to talk about this race. We'll take a quick break, come back and talk about some of the statewide and then update numbers from these legislative races. House District 121 used to be held by Joe Strauss. Strauss resigned in disgrace, was replaced by Steve Allison, who's now held that seat for a couple terms. He's kind of like a piece of furniture. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but he doesn't do much. Challenged by two folks, Mr. LaHood and Mr. Champion, and it looks like LaHood has defeated challenger. 99% of the vote in. LaHood has received 54.2% of the vote.
Wow.
And this is Bexar County.
Yep.
This is not, and this is a district, again, that gave us Joe Strauss as Speaker of the House. This is not MAGA country, right?
Well, I've talked about this 2 years ago when Mark DeRazio won that seat. So 2 years ago, Lyle Larson, who was one of the 5 most liberal Republicans, retired, was replaced by Mark DeRazio, who's arguably definitely been in the conservative third of the caucus of the 86 members. He's in the top 20 or so. And then you have this with LaHood. I think in Bexar County, we have seen, whether it's Lamar Smith to Chip Roy, Lyle Larson to Mark DeRazio, Joe Strauss to Steve Allison to now what it looks like Mark LaHood. We'll get a couple more Election Day votes in before I'd call that one, but still, this is a very promising for the conservatives in Bexar County.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the statewide races, take another look at the Court of Criminal Appeals, and then see what has changed in these House races. We'll be back in just a minute.
Are you worried about your kid's future? You should be. I'm Charles Blaine with Texas Tomorrow. This is a show where we're going to talk about the issues and the people that are pushing the policies that concern your family, your home, and your kids. Catch Texas Tomorrow every Thursday.
What have you been told all your life? That if somebody's a minority in the United States of America, they're a left-wing nutcase? CNN, MSNBS, they've all invested millions of dollars and tons of hours to convince you that if you're a minority in this country, you have to be a Democrat, you have to be a socialist, you have to be a communist. Well, the Salcedo Storm podcast destroys that narrative. There are a lot of folks out there who are quote-unquote people of color who just look at themselves as Americans, who want to preserve this last best hope of mankind on the planet, which is the United States of America, and loves our Constitution, loves the rule of law because we know and understand what it means. So when you tune in to the Salcedo Storm podcast, that's what you're getting. Every single podcast, one way or another, we are dedicated to saving the United States of America as founded in the United States Constitution and destroying this narrative that, well, we Latinos are just all a bunch of left-wing nutcases.
News and analysis on what's happening in Texas. End your day with daily headlines from Texas Scorecard. Every day at 5 p.m., join me, Brandon Waltens, as we recap the biggest stories of the day and talk about why they matter to you. From the state capitol to town hall, there's no shortage of events happening. Keep up with it all. Watch and subscribe to Daily Headlines from Texas Scorecard.
Do you want to see the world around you change? Are you looking for an internship that will help Texans lead the way in our country?
Texas Scorecard provides real news for real Texans and is one of the fastest growing news outlets in the state. Right now, Scorecard is looking for young people interested in journalism and media.
We call it the fellowship. Not exactly that kind of fellowship, but you will find yourself around like-minded world changers dedicated to telling stories that matter to Texans.
We're looking for young people ages 18 to 25 to join our paid fellowship. All fellows will receive a monthly stipend of $2,000 to cover their expenses.
Fellows will have the opportunity to specialize in one of 3 tracks: writing, research, and administration.
Go to texasscorecard.com/fellowship to apply today.
If you're not watching the Luke Macias show, then you are not as engaged as everybody else is in Texas who's trying to make a difference, knowing exactly what's going on so that they can take action on the things that really matter. Guys, watch us on the Roku app for Texas Scorecard. Watch us on YouTube. Listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Get engaged, get more informed, so together we can actually make a bigger difference on things that matter for the future of Texas. God bless you.
Hey, thanks for coming back here. Glad to have you all with us. Hey, just a reminder, if there are particular races that you're interested in, don't ask me who the governor of Arkansas is. I don't know. But if you're interested in state races, state legislative, statewide races, love to chat with you about those. You can throw those into the comments wherever you're watching. Or you can send an email to letters@texasscorecard.com, letters@texasscorecard.com. The team is back there checking that stuff, and we will either talk about them, or you'll get a response back there on wherever you're watching the messaging. We'll try to be as responsive as we can to those. Really appreciate you again spending some time with us. Luke Macias is here. He is, of course, the host of the Luke Macias Show, which makes sense. It'd be weird if it was called something else.
I know.
And we've got Brandon Waltens, who is the senior editor at Texas Scorecard, and he is the host of the Daily Headline. We've just now gone through kind of a first round of looking at the legislative races. I want to start back, though, with these statewide races. Early on, we talked about the Court of Criminal Appeals, where those races are, but there are other not statewide, but of state significance races, specifically the State Board of Education. And Luke, you have a particular interest in those. Tell us what you're seeing in these SBOs. And so, just real quick for folks, State Board of Education has oversight on curriculum. They oversee a lot of the implementation of policy as it relates to our government-funded schools. A lot of folks have ignored the SBOE for a long time. Past few years, we've seen the SBOE begin to re-exert itself in many ways over the governance of public education, probably none too quickly. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing there.
The other big thing that the State Board of Education has gotten into hot water over is the fact that they've opposed a number of charter schools, which would give more parents school choice. And the sitting State Board of Education has not been incredibly friendly to charter schools. While there was a health curriculum they passed that had pregnant person in it or something. I mean, just crazy stuff. So Tom Maynard is the incumbent out of the area that's north of Austin, kind of Williamson County, and these things are 2 congressional districts in size. So people are there's so many votes.
15 SBOE seats.
That's right.
Statewide, and we have 36 congressional seats.
Yeah. So
31 state senate seats. So these are twice the geographic and population space as a state senate.
150 to 200,000 votes are cast in these elections, and people don't know what they're doing. But Tom Maynard is going to go likely to a runoff against Mary Bone. D.C. Caldwell, who's the 3rd place, got 10% there. He also ran in the Democrat primary. I don't know what's going to happen there. There's legal problems
he ran
there.
in some other states.
It looks weird. This guy does not. he's rolled the dice politically. So
Yeah.
Pat Hardy, who is a very long-term member of the State Board of Education, literally been there for maybe 3 decades, is losing to Brandon Hall right now, and that's in Tarrant and Parker County. Tarrant and Parker are 2 definite conservative counties, so it looks like right now she's losing 46 to 54. And then also Pam Little, who's a longtime member in Collin County, looks like she's going to a runoff with Jamie Coleman, previously Jamie Story, who's been in a lot of Texas politics circles for a long time, and now Jamie has come out of, she's also still a full-time mom, but on the campaign trail, it looks like she's likely headed to a runoff with Pam Little.
We've talked about the Court of Criminal Appeals, but what we have not talked about is the other Supreme Court. We have 2 Supreme Courts in Texas. You've got the Court of Criminal Appeals for the Supreme Court of Criminal Matters, and then you've got the Supreme Court, which is the Supreme Court over civil matters. Jimmy Blacklock was running unopposed in the Republican primary. John Devine was being challenged by Brian Walker in his Supreme Court race. Devine, I think it is safe to say, is a grassroots conservative, very unabashed. He, bragged about having been arrested by protesting against abortion, protesting abortion clinics. He wears his values on his sleeve, and then he will hand you a couple business cards with his values on them. Kind of a guy, very unabashed, and he was being heavily challenged in this race right now with not a whole lot of the percentage, a whole lot of the vote in, but Devine is just barely winning. They're being challenged by Brian Walker, whose dad sits on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals.
I mean, this is going to be, is for sure, right? These races, as we talked about with the Court of Criminal Appeals, very rare that these races are the ones that people are talking about. And so the Supreme Court is no different. In this case, you have John Devine, somebody who has been, notably, by the way, was in many cases the only person on the Texas Supreme Court to stand up against some of the lockdowns and things we saw during COVID. So someone who has been a conservative voice, but somebody who, because of that, you have seen establishment forces try to rally behind Brian Walker, spend a lot of money in this race, and try to take him down. And so, this is, of course, it's a statewide race, so you do have to see, right, what all these counties come in on this, and it is really close right now.
With the race that is surprising me, I'm going to move over to the Court of Criminal Appeals. At this moment, you have Michelle Slaughter has now dropped behind her challenger, Lee Finley. And that was a race I think a lot of folks were kind of expecting that if one of the CCA justices survived, it would be Michelle Slaughter. Now, there's still a lot of votes to be counted, to be very clear. But it's interesting that even that race where I think a lot of folks have assumed Michelle Slaughter might be the one of the 3 to survive, that even she is now falling.
One thing that shows with the Court of Criminal Appeals is that Ken Paxton's message to voters that I have been gutted of my ability to enforce election integrity laws resonated, because these go to the Supreme Court race. It's a pretty close race, right? Devine and Walker, they're both pretty friendly ballot names. So Devine's, I call him the Clarence Thomas of the Texas Supreme Court. We've got kind of a Thomas to Robert spectrum on the Supreme Court, and he's definitely a Thomas. But with the Court of Criminal Appeals, 60-40, over 60%. So that message resonated with those races. Michelle Slaughter has always been a great ballot name. People like Slaughter being a judge. It just sounds good, especially if you're for the death penalty. It just so the point is that she is still losing, but and so yes, that she's going to be the highest vote getter of those incumbents. But based on the current projection of her being under 70,000 votes, you can build in a little bit of projection there and say she has to see a turnaround. Again, Trump endorsed that slate on Monday. Yeah. So most of these early votes that were cast did not know Donald Trump endorsed. That information was text blasted. That information was in the media. There's going to be more Election Day voters that know of Trump's involvement and endorsement, more than likely, in my opinion. And you could actually see those things grow.
Okay, so folks are asking about House District 72, which is Jeff Leach as the incumbent. He was being challenged there, but I think that it's fairly safe to say that, I'm sorry, not 72. I lost the number here. Give me one moment. The number 2,
67.
67. Thank you. Jeff Leach was being challenged, but he does not appear to be in trouble this evening.
No, he doesn't. Ultimately, what you're going to see in Collin County is Angela Paxton and Ken Paxton's backyard. Justin Holland and Frederick Frazier are going to go to runoffs. It looks to me like Jeff Leach and Matt Shaheen will get reelected, and then Candy Noble is likely to get reelected, but that race is a lot closer. She's probably going to get elected by a much smaller margin than Leach and Shaheen. Ultimately, Leach far outspent his opponent, and so I think you do have to kind of realize that these are some of these races where you have an incumbent who worked very hard for his reelection. Jeff Leach has always been a good retail politician. Even if you do disagree with his politics, you can't say that the guy doesn't work his district really hard. And so, that's one where the grassroots kind of conservative coalition will fall a little short, it looks like.
Okay, so let's I'll go back through some of these bigger races we're talking about. Stephanie Click in Tarrant County, challenged again by David Lowy, and then there's a third person in that race, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, we're looking right now. I mean, when you look at early voting turnout, we've got a little bit of election day. Rather, we don't have any election day, I don't think, yet in this district.
0 precincts reported.
Yeah, so 0 precincts election day. So this is all early voting in mail-in. Stephanie Click narrowly leading her challenger David Lowy, and there is a third candidate in that race, but she's at 49.34%. And it doesn't matter if you're at if you're at 2% or if you're at 49.99%. If you're not above 50%, you're going to a runoff. And you could see a case where Stephanie Click does get to a runoff narrowly in this race, again, depending on what election day does.
That's right. And Stephanie Click, last election cycle, barely went to a runoff.
Yes.
She got like 49.8% of the vote.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really ironic if it comes in like just at the same number it was last time.
Yeah.
It could be a very tight race. David Lowe is overperforming what he did 2 years ago. He lost to her in the runoff with basically a 47-53 margin was the runoff election. So that is the situation there.
Okay, we're being asked about Texas House 29. Ed Thompson, the incumbent there, that's now an open seat race, right?
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so you've got Garcia and Garza challenging each other there. I don't know what the percentage of vote is. I assume that we're still just kind of in the early vote doldrums there, but 54% for Garcia and, actually do know the percent, 54% in, 43% for Garcia, and 30% for Garza in that race right now. There's the third person there, but I'm not seeing the name. I apologize.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. You have quite a few of these races coming in. Jeff Bauchnight is another one, HD 30, which is a replacement
Victoria.
of Gina Morrison. Bauchnight at 47% of the vote. AJ Louderback at 36% of the vote. So that looks like it's headed to the runoff.
Now, this was an interesting race where you had a split between Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Governor Abbott, with Attorney General Paxton being with Abbott in supporting Bauchnight, Patrick and Paxton supporting Bauchnight, and the governor supporting Louderback.
Well, I think you also saw a split between the governor and the lieutenant governor when it came to the open race. I don't think we've talked about it yet, but the open race in district, what district was that? House District 12, where you have Kyle Cassell, somebody who is one of the most liberal Republicans in the House, somebody who opposed school choice, to name just one thing, but was liberal on a number of issues. He announced that after the session, everything, that he wasn't going to run for re-election. And so you actually had a case there where the governor has endorsed Trey Warden, who's got 39.8% right now, with some amount of the vote in. It's kind of unclear to see. Ben Bias, who received the endorsement, I believe, of Dan Patrick, and
a very late
endorsement from Dan Patrick. And I think Attorney General Ken Paxton, I'm not 100% sure.
I think he endorsed
came in
him like
very
yesterday.
late. Yesterday, yeah. It was like yesterday.
Yeah.
He's got 29.4%, and then in the middle you have John Slocum with 30%. And so this looks like an open race that'll go to a runoff. But it's interesting to see here that Governor Abbott's candidate looks more likely to make that runoff. But we'll see.
I mean, look, John Harvey Slocum, and Michael can speak to this, but just the Slocum name
Slocum name is very powerful.
It's a
in
big
College
deal,
Station.
right, for
Yeah,
Aggies.
That's right.
RC Slocum followed me on Twitter, and like I texted my dad and was
Oh,
like,
nice,
you
yeah.
wouldn't believe. So it's like, my point is, like, this is a name that matters. It moves numbers, and I would say John Harvey Slocum is outperforming what people expected him to do versus Ben Bias and Trey Wharton being kind of the more popular people, the people that people talked about more. So it'll be interesting to see if that actually plays into a runoff.
Okay, so we've got some more results coming in. 99% of the votes have been counted in House District 1 with Van Dever at 46.3%, Chris Spencer at 43.3%, and Dale Hulls at 10.4%, meaning Van Dever and the incumbent, Gary Van Dever, and Chris Spencer will be heading to a runoff.
Yep, it does look like they're headed to a runoff. And again, we'll just have to see the last little bit of Election Day votes coming in, whether Chris Spencer goes above Van Dever.
All right, so then we've already talked about Brent Money in House District 2 having already secured that victory against incumbent Joel Dutton. In House District, this is Keith Bell, House District 5?
Four,
yeah. You've got Keith Bell easily winning there against Joshua Furstein.
a couple we haven't talked about. One is West Verdell, the replacement of Andrew Murr. Right now, he looks to be running away with that seat. That is a big deal. It's the largest geographic district in Texas. At this moment in time, it looks to be a 60-40 race. And unless we see some massive trend from Election Day, West will win that race. That's probably one that should be called. The big deal is that Andrew Murr represented that district. General investigating chairman who led the impeachment of Ken Paxton. He endorsed Hatch Smith. His team got behind Hatch Smith. And, I mean, with early voting, West Verdell won Kimball County, which is Junction. That's literally where Andrew Murr was a district judge before he ran for the legislature. I think he got 80% of the vote. So you have Murr's own home county voting for West Verdell to replace him, and Verdell could not be anything further from Andrew Murr. He's a strong, committed conservative. I've been at multiple forums. I think you and I both have moderated forums in that district. Verdell has been very clear to his community, I'm going to go to Austin to fight for conservative victory. So I think that's one. Hillary Hickland is just over Hugh Shine in Temple. I think that is definitely one that if she continues will be a victory for the school choice crowd as a whole. Shelley Luther looks to be edging out Reggie Smith. Again, every dump of votes that has come in so far has widened her lead on Reggie Smith. So that, I mean, that's not a trend that tends to go the opposite way. We saw that with the Jill Dutton Brent Money special election when she won. You know, Election Day votes kept coming in and she kept eking out more and more. So that's a trend that's hard to stop once you see it from Election Day.
In House District 18, I don't know what the percentage of the votes in is, but you've got Janice Holt at 52%. I'm sorry, I'm just getting it right now. Half of the votes counted in House District 18. Janice Holt is at 52% and Ernest Bales is at 40%.
Again, Election Day votes start coming in. Janice starts eking up over 50. If that is a trend we see that goes around the state, you might see a handful of these. Barry Wernick, Morgan Meyer up in HD 108, the Dallas County seat that we talked about. That's another example where if those Election Day results come in, then you could see somebody eke it out.
In House District 19, that's the Troxclair Biederman race. Third person is that race also.
Third person.
There's a third person in that race, yes.
And Troxclair is at 51% right now. So it, again, still very close.
Very close, and I'm not sure unless something has changed. I looked at this about 10, 15 minutes ago. Unless something has changed, I still don't think we see Gillespie County reflected in those numbers. And Gillespie County, like I said, they're hand counting, but Gillespie County is somewhere where Kyle Biederman has a lot of support. Remember, he was in the Texas House before. He has ties to Fredericksburg. That's where his support is. And so if you see Gillespie County going heavily for Kyle, you can bet that this is that would dip her below 50%.
All right, let's talk about some of these other incumbent races, see what movement there's been. In House District 26, that's Matt Morgan challenging J.C. Jatan. where Morgan out 55%, Jatan at 39%.
Yeah.
There's a third person in that race. That's when the numbers don't equal 100. But again, these are difficult numbers for incumbents to overcome.
Very difficult.
I can't tell you how big of an upset this would be. J.C. Jatan is a darling of the Austin establishment. I call him the Greg Bonin clique. They kind of, have given him so many positions of power, given him so many bills to carry for them. And that is a race where Troy Nels and Ken Paxton came in and said, we want to define this guy. I know the Texas Family Project had a ton of effort in there talking about Jatan's the one who debated Tony Tinderholt on the floor saying, we want to give this money to mental health care facilities that are socially transitioning these kids.
Yeah.
And then, yes, he got $1.7 million from TLR and a lot of other interests who came in to try to cover up those votes. Right now, based on the early vote, that money did not cover up the multitude of sins. And so, again, once we see Election Day on that one, I think we'll have a little bit more of an idea.
In House District 58, we've talked about this race before, but there you have Dwayne Burns still trailing Helen Kerwin.
49 to 42, right?
Yeah, 49-42 still. Again, one of those places where it is, it's just, as the numbers come in, Helen Kerwin getting the endorsement of Donald Trump, getting the endorsement of Greg Abbott, getting the endorsement of Ted Cruz, Dan Patrick. I mean, just keeps on coming. One of you described Dwayne Burns very well as maybe one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. I mean, just a very pleasant fellow. Yes. But yet not a really great vote when it comes to Republican. If we were still in 1997 and the district had just flipped from Democrat to Republican, he might be the furthest right member of the Texas House. But in 2024, he's not there.
No.
So. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about now House District. This is House District 61, Richardson and Frazier, looking more and more like it's going to be a runoff there between the two of them.
Yes, exactly. I don't know that the numbers have changed that much since we talked about it last time, but again, you've got Frederick Frazier sitting there at 32%. Imagine that. More than 2/3 right now of the voters, of the votes that have been counted, are people that have said, we do not want Frederick Frazier representing us as Republicans. He's just a freshman. I mean, he has served one term. That is absolutely astounding and should be a big message. And frankly, this is sort of speculation, but you do wonder at a certain point, if you're one of these incumbents getting a second place and frankly a distant second place like that, at what point do you start wondering whether or not you even run in the runoff? I don't know. I think that's a decision that has to be made at some point for some of these guys, but that's a pretty big shocker.
I want to talk about some of these races. This would be counterintuitive in a time we're talking about election results. But am I the only one who finds it significant that Tony Tinderholt, Brian Harrison, Nate Satchline, the three most combative, if you will, the loudest, the strongest, the guys most willing to be at the back mic of the Texas House, challenging the speaker and the speaker's cohorts, they did not receive any challenge in the primary?
I mean, reality was that once Dade Phelan cut up all of his members and made them walk the plank on the Paxton vote and then killed school choice against the governor's wishes, spit in the face of the Senate and Dan Patrick. He put the chamber on so much defense that I just don't think they had time to plan a very offensive strategy. They threw in this last-minute opponent to Steve Toth and then threw $300,000 in against him in like 2 or 3 weeks, and yet he loses, right? I mean, and Toth wins 68% of the vote early against a guy who outspent him 2-1 in the last couple of weeks. It still wasn't enough. So right now I think you have 8 incumbents losing outright with Jill Dutton, who's technically an incumbent, Clardy, Bales, Jatan, Shine, Rogers, Smith, and Allison. And then you have 5 incumbents that are trailing opponents and going into a runoff, which is Dade Phelan, John Kemple, Dwayne Burns, Frederick Frazier, Lynn Stuckey. And then you have 3 individuals going into a runoff but ahead, still not good for them, Gary Van Dever, Justin Holland, and Stephanie Click. I mean, just understand that if that happens, that will be the worst political night for incumbent Republicans in the Texas House being challenged from their right in in history. You mentioned this, but people like For Price and Amarillo, who left. For Price was always consistently ranked as one of the 15 or 20 most liberal Republicans, being replaced by Caroline Fairley, who I believe, from everything you see, will definitely be one of the more conservative members of the Texas House. And so even these open seats, Chairman Andrew Murr being replaced by Wes Ferdell, those aren't even in the numbers I just gave you with the not 8 and the 5 and the 3. We haven't even hit the open seats. And so, so far, it looks like the Texas House big picture is moving to the right considerably.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will take a last look at some of these numbers. If you have a question about particular races, before we break, House District 20, that is Terry Wilson in Williamson County. A number of folks have been pinging us asking about results there, being challenged by Ms. Chapa.
Janine Chapa.
Janine Chapa, thank you. Williamson County, not yet reporting any numbers. So maybe when we come back, we'll have some numbers from Williamson County.
I will tell you, I think I saw Williamson County. The Secretary of State hasn't posted it, but I believe Terry's up 60-40 from early voting. But one big victory there for conservatives, the grassroots were supporting Michelle Evans for county chair. Anybody who's been in Republican politics knows that Williamson County has been dominated by very liberal to moderate George P. Bush type Republicans. Michelle Evans is a diehard conservative activist who's now run for county chair and got 68% of the vote in early voting. So I think we can safely say she will be the next GOP county chair, which is going to be a big win for conservatives.
Outstanding. All right, we will be back right after this with another look at these races from around the state.
Are you worried about your kid's future? You should be. I'm Charles Blaine with Texas Tomorrow. This is a show where we're going to talk about the issues and the people that are pushing the policies that concern your family, your home, and your kids. Catch Texas Tomorrow every Thursday.
Latinos aren't all the same. The media in Hollywood might try to paint us with broad brushstrokes, but that's because most of them aren't Latinos. As a community, we deeply care about our faith, our families, and the cultural erosion we see happening across our state and nation. Each day on the Salcedo Storm podcast, I talk about the issues that matter to Latinos and all Americans. No fluff, no pulling punches, and no eschewing the truth for the sake of feelings. Real talk about the real issues Latinos and Americans care about. The Salcedo Storm podcast. I hope you'll join me weekdays wherever you get your podcasts.
If you're not watching the Luke Macias show, then you are not as engaged as everybody else is in Texas who's trying to make a difference, knowing exactly what's going on so that they can take action on the things that really matter. Guys, watch us on the Roku app for Texas Scorecard. Watch us on YouTube. Listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Get engaged, get more informed, so together we can actually make a bigger difference on things that matter for the future of Texas. God bless you.
Do you want to see the world around you change? Are you looking for an internship that will help Texans lead the way in our country?
Texas Scorecard provides real news for real Texans and is one of the fastest growing news outlets in the state. Right now, Scorecard is looking for young people interested in journalism and media.
We call it the fellowship. Not exactly that kind of fellowship, but you will find yourself around like-minded world changers dedicated to telling stories that matter to Texans.
We're looking for young people ages 18 to 25 to join our paid fellowship. All fellows will receive a monthly stipend of $2,000 to cover their expenses.
Fellows will have the opportunity to specialize in one of 3 tracks: writing, research, and administration.
Go to texasscorecard.com/fellowship to apply today.
News and analysis on what's happening in Texas. End your day with daily headlines from Texas Scorecard. Every day at 5 p.m., join me, Brandon Waltens, as we recap the biggest stories of the day and talk about why they matter to you. From the state capitol to town hall, there's no shortage of events happening. Keep up with it all. Watch and subscribe to daily headlines from Texas Scorecard.
Okay, hey, look, we are in the middle of doing some high-level math here, so we're going to take just about 5 minutes or so. So you've got time to go get a bowl of ice cream, pop another bag of popcorn, whatever it is else you've got going on. We'll be back in about 5 minutes here on the live stream. So stick with us. You'll listen to some music, listen to some ads, that kind of thing, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes with some updated election numbers for you.
you been told all your life that if somebody's a minority in the United States of America, they're a left-wing nutcase? CNN, MSNBS, they've all invested millions of dollars and tons of hours to convince you that if you're a minority in this country, you have to be a Democrat, you have to be a socialist, you have to be a communist. Well, the Salcedo Storm podcast destroys that narrative. There are a lot of folks out there who are quote-unquote people of color who just look at themselves as Americans, who want to preserve this last best hope of mankind on the planet, which is the United States of America, and loves our Constitution, loves the rule of law because we know and understand what it means. So when you tune in to the Salcedo Storm podcast, that's what you're getting. Every single podcast, one way or another, we are dedicated to saving the United States of America as founded in the United States Constitution and destroying this narrative that, well, we Latinos are just all a bunch of left-wing nutcases.
Hey, and we are back. Thank you so much for hanging with us during that quick break. We just want to make sure we have something useful to say to you. Before we dig in this, you'll notice that Luke Macias had to jet. Kids need to be tucked in, all sorts of other things. So we appreciate Luke Macias hanging with us for a little bit this evening. But more importantly, I want to thank, there are a whole lot of folks who make Texas Scorecard happen, donors from around the state who without their generous support of Texas Scorecard, none of what we do would be possible. So thank you very much. If you would like to contribute to the work of Texas Scorecard, you can go to texasscorecard.com, and there at texasscorecard.com you can click that little donate button, and that will let you make a contribution to the ongoing work of Texas Scorecard, ensuring that real Texans have access to real news. Really appreciate every one of you who give to support this work. I also want to thank our production team, notably Walker York, Nick Shepard, and Riley Edwards. They were the ones making sure that all the technical stuff worked. When it worked, it was because of them. When it wasn't worked, it's because me and Brandon sometimes start pressing buttons that we're not supposed to press. And hey, that's part of the fun. We get to press buttons occasionally. And of course, the entire Texas Scorecard team, fueled mostly by cheap pizza out in the other part of the building, helping us go through these numbers. So thank you. They're giving up their time with their families to be here tonight. But who am I kidding? They'd be here anyway. But we appreciate them doing that. All right, Brandon. Let's one race that we have completely ignored this evening is the one open seat in the Texas Senate.
Yeah,
and that is Senate District 30. That was a four-way race to replace the retiring Drew Springer, who at kind of the last minute this spring announced he wasn't running. Some of you will remember the bit of, I guess I would call it, Keystone Cops routine that was performed there, where you had Drew Springer announce that he wasn't seeking re-election. He had previously, the seat had previously been held by Pat Fallon, now in Congress. Pat Fallon suddenly announces he's coming back, that he's leaving Congress, that he's going to run for the state Senate seat, gathers up all these endorsements, and then like 24 hours later says, oh, wait, I've changed my mind. I think I'm going to stay in Congress. And now suddenly you've got this reshuffle again. So it's kind of a crazy start to the Senate district race. So it's now turned into a four-way race.
Yeah.
Tell us what's happening there.
Yeah, so what you're seeing is that Brent Hagenbu, who is the person who had the endorsement of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, had the endorsement of President Donald Trump, but as somebody who, just talking to conservatives who are on the ground, who are in that district, a lot of conservatives had some issues with, specifically due to his time. I believe he was the chair of the Denton County Republican Party. Some people had issues with that. He's also been dragged into some challenges over whether or not he's even eligible for the position, based on the fact that it appeared like he was saying he lived in his office and he wasn't meeting some of the residency requirements for running for office. But either way, it looks like some of that is dragging him down, because rather than winning outright, which is what some people expected, specifically with the amount of money and endorsements he drew in, instead he's been kept right now, the latest numbers, with 84%, I believe, votes counted. He's at 38.9% in this four-way race. At second place is Jace Yarborough at 32.3%. And so it looks like you're going to have those two candidates in a runoff election. Dr. Carrie DeMore, who was a candidate who was endorsed by Attorney General Ken Paxton, is in, I believe, third place. And so Looks like you're going to have Hagenbu and Yarborough in this race. And to your point, Michael, this is the only open Senate seat race where we're really seeing this sort of battle, not just in the primary, but now in a runoff. And so, we may have, I don't know, we ignored it tonight until now, saved it till now as we saw these numbers in. But this is going to be a race that a lot of people are going to be looking at in the next 2 months.
And, we talked earlier about how when you look at an election and when the incumbent goes to election, even in first place, it's hard for them to overcome, that difference. That's not the case in an open seat where when someone's in the lead going into it, they are kind of perceived to be the leader. They don't have the same, forces at play. In an open seat, you will often have people voting for someone, whereas with when you have got an incumbent, you only have people voting for people. You also have voting against the incumbent, right? So it makes a very different kind of beast to deal with in these elections. So that's going to be an interesting race. Expect it to be expensive, expect it to be loud, and a lot at stake. You're talking about the control of the Texas Senate. All right, let's take another quick look, Brandon, at some of these kind of high profile, if you will, House seats. None more high profile than House District 21. That is Beaumont, that's Jasper, that is the home of the incumbent Speaker of the Texas House, Dade Phelan. Dade Phelan right now with about, looks like maybe 90% of the vote coming in, getting different reports there. But Dade Phelan has, looks like 45.8% of the vote versus David Covey with 45.3% of the vote. Alicia Davis taking up that remaining, call it 8%.
Yeah, so looking increasingly likely this is something this is a race that's going to go to a runoff. I'd seen recently that there was only one other speaker who in the 70s, and I'm forgetting his name, but that was put into a runoff actually, and he ended up losing. Could this be a repeat of that 50 years later? We'll see, but that's going to be the race. I mean, for all of these races we're talking about, and you've got a number of these incumbents either losing or being forced into runoffs. I think that's the one that's going to be getting the headlines tomorrow.
Right. House District 58. Again, an incumbent, Dwayne Burns. That's kind of the northern edge of central Texas, kind of the far southwest out of the Metroplex. But Dwayne Burns with two challengers. Looks like Dwayne Burns coming in second place going into that runoff with Helen Kerwin of Glen Rose leading that at 48.8% of the vote versus Dwayne Burns 42% of the vote. And that's with about 85% of the vote in. House District 60, maybe the second most watched race of the evening and over the past several weeks. That's where you have Glenn Rogers, the incumbent, who seemed to take some special glee in attacking the Republican Party of Texas and attacking Governor Greg Abbott over the issues of education freedom for parents and just kind of generally being kind of a thorn in the side, if you will, and being challenged by Mike Alcott. The net effect of that is it looks like Alcott is cruising to, dare I say, landslide victory? Is that?
I mean, it certainly looks that way. But as we talked about with Luke earlier, this was somebody who had gained the hat trick of the Abbott, Patrick, Trump, Paxton, Sid Miller, Cruz. I mean, literally, if somebody was giving an endorsement, they were endorsing Olcott.
Yeah, and in fact, I will just note here, because it was just so darn much fun, you had Glenn Rogers challenging Sid Miller to a duel, like an actual
that's the level we got.
Bang, bang duel. That's where that race went. So when you talk about an incumbent losing their mind over their polling results, that's what happens there. House District 62, this is a notable race, of course, because you have the incumbent Reggie Smith, who is sitting there being challenged by Shelley Luther. Smith, who opposed Greg Abbott on education choice and a number of other things, but yet Shelley Luther, who opposed Greg Abbott on the COVID lockdown numbers, but looking like as the votes keep coming in, Shelley Luther is increasing her lead over Reggie Smith there in House District 62.
Yes, and this is a race that, despite the fact that Reggie Smith was one of those Republicans that voted against school choice, this was one of the races where Abbott stayed out. He stayed on the sidelines. And so it just goes to show you, I think, just how important this issue. Now, there were a lot of issues that Shelley's campaign dealt with against Reggie Smith, but it just goes to show you that even in these races where the governor stayed out, if it was against liberal incumbents who voted against school choice and then were thus bad votes on a lot of other conservative issues, it didn't matter whether or not the governor was supporting their opponent or not. Voters showed that they were sick of a lot of these incumbents already.
Last race I want to look at, again, this is one of those very significant races. It almost doesn't matter if the incumbent wins or loses because the numbers are so interesting. And that's House District 108. This is Morgan Meyer. He is the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. He is about as tight in the inner circle of House Speaker Dade Phelan and the kind of the crony clique that currently runs the Texas House. And here is Morgan Meyer right now at about 51%, slightly over 51%. This is Highland Park. Morgan Meyer, very tight-knit into that very cloistered community, and yet only getting 51%. This does not, this race, more than maybe even than Dade Phelan, maybe more than Glenn Rogers, should send shivers down the spine of every incumbent lawmaker. Morgan Meyer, as chairman of the Ways and Means, a fellow who is, look, he is a very nice fellow. He is well-spoken. He looks like Highland Park. He looks like his district. He should not be in trouble. He should be having 60, 70% numbers right now. Instead, he is struggling to get 52%. Whatever happens this evening with Morgan Meyer, though, this is going to be a warning shot, don't you think, Brandon, to incumbents about what happens when they get too far afield from the base, too far afield from kind of the basics of the Republican Party.
Absolutely, and with Morgan Meyer specifically, a lot of this was about some of the differences that he and the Lieutenant Governor had on some financial issues dealing with taxes, et cetera, during the session. And so, but it just goes to show you, right, if you're bad on one of those issues, likely you're going to be bad on a lot of those. And that even in an area like Highland Park, where some would say maybe it leans a little more establishment or has traditionally done that, there's still a limit to what you can do. And Morgan Meyer's finding that out tonight. I do want to add this before we go, though.
Absolutely.
Now we're seeing that Dade Phelan has put out a statement that Dade Phelan has essentially conceded that there's going to be a runoff. That runoff's going to be on May 28th. And so, just underscoring that indeed, wow, what a wild night this is, where you have the Speaker of the House out there saying that he's going to be in a runoff race. And
look, again, a piece I wrote on Saturday, I'd point you to. I think it's a lot of conversations, a lot of different folks went into that. But given these results tonight and Dade Phelan's statement just now, acknowledging he's going into a runoff, indicates that starting tomorrow, on March the 6th, is when the race for the speakership at the Texas House begins, where incumbent Republicans are going to begin preening and begin trying to work the background. And the question is going to be front and center for you as a voter and taxpayer in Texas, and the conversations you have with your Republican state representatives starting in the morning on March 6th. The campaign has officially begun for who will be the next Speaker of the House. It will not be Dade Phelan. You cannot be the Speaker of the Texas House under all the gentlemen's agreements that have existed for half of a century or longer. You can't be the Speaker of the Texas House if you've been forced into a runoff in your home district. You're not safe. You can't protect yourself, let alone any other member of the Texas House. And that's the bargain incumbent lawmakers make. So, starting tomorrow, you need to make sure you're having, no matter who your Republican state representative is, you need to try to have conversations with them about the quality and caliber of man and woman who's going to be the next speaker, and whether you want them doing what Dade Phelan did, doing what Dennis Bonnen did, his predecessor, doing what his predecessor, Joe Strauss, did, and getting their votes from the Democrats first. Right now, there are conversations, I am sure, happening even this evening by incumbent members who maybe weren't challenged, cruising to an easy victory, thinking they could be the speaker, and they are calling their Democrat colleagues to test the waters on the other side of the aisle. You need to be having conversations, I would recommend, with your state representative, making sure that they know where you stand on that issue. The Republican convention coming up in May, that's going to be front and center, I suspect, of that body's gathering. So, just because these primaries are coming to an end now, for a lot of these cats, maybe overtime for Dade Phelan and others, but the control of the Texas House is just beginning.
Absolutely, and we're going to be covering all of it at Texas Scorecard, especially as we head into these runoffs and then past the runoffs as we look towards November and then that legislative session in January. I can tell you this. There's a lot of time to be talking about what exactly tonight's election results and some of the other results and the runoff, et cetera, mean for the legislative session coming up. But right now, each of these races were individual races for sure. But you did see the voters did have a message to send tonight, and I think a lot of incumbent lawmakers are going to spend the next few days and next few weeks trying to decipher exactly what that was.
All right, Brandon Waltens, thanks for your time this evening, and thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. Now let's go do great things for Texas.